G'day mate, 40 here. So how do Jews deal with Christmas? Most American Jews enjoy Christmas. That's my sense of things. But how, as a minority, do you participate in the majority's culture and practices? Or if you're a member of the majority, how do you participate in, say, your friend's Hanukkah celebration? And so the way that we participate in other people's celebrations, let's say somebody's birthday, how do we participate that? We put ourselves in their place, right? We have a little empathy, and we may use imaginative consent. Imaginative consent, it's not have a Jew reading a piece of literature by a Christian. So almost all of the great works of
Is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain.
Okay, sorry about that. I was muted there. So how does a Jew participate in Christmas in any fashion? In my sense of things, most Jews enjoy the Christmas season, but obviously we don't believe that the Messiah came and that the Messiah was born on December 25th. But how do you participate in somebody else's celebration, whether it's religious or cultural or personal? And you do it by vicarious participation, right? You don't have to believe in something to participate and to enjoy it, right? I can go to your birthday party and I can enjoy it. I can go to your wedding and I can feel joy because you feel joy. Now, I don't feel joy because I'm just sitting there the whole time imagining that this is really a celebration for me. If I go to somebody's wedding, I celebrate for them. So you can give vicarious consent or imaginative consent for the length of a poem, for the length of a movie, for the length of a celebration, religious or ethnic or personal celebration that is not yours, but you put yourself into other people's shoes and you're able to participate and to enjoy. And so we also have many of the most famous Christmas songs in the United States that have been written by Jews. Now, these songs are generally not the most religious, right? So you can't expect that Jews are generally going to write Christmas songs that are particularly religious, but even for most Americans, Christmas is not a particularly religious time of year. So of the top 25 Christmas songs, according to a recent list, 11 were composed at least in part by Jews. You got White Christmas by Irving Berlin, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, the Christmas song, Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, Winter Wonderland, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Sleigh Ride, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, Silver Bells, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, and Little Drummer Boy. So Christmas songs that Jews write seldom really involve religion, and some are just songs about cold weather, but they're not generic holiday tunes on the other hand. Now, let's say you take Christmas very seriously. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist, so we did not celebrate Christmas in my home growing up. So it's a little bit foreign to me because I was raised that the Christmas is pagan, and so we were beyond that, which is kind of sad but that anyway, that's how it was in my town. But now, how are Christians going to feel about non-Christians writing many of their most famous Christmas tunes? That's a good question, but I think Christians recognize that Christmas is also a cultural and an American holiday. It's not just a religious holiday. Steve Saylor wrote a good essay on this topic back in 2005 for VDare, The War Against Christmas, 2005, Christmas, Jews, De-Assimilation and Decline. So if you got a strong majority, you would expect minorities to assimilate towards majority culture, right? But our culture now has made it so that there's no need for minorities to even make the smallest effort to assimilate to majority culture. Now, there are some fairly decent Christian. Going back to the 19th century, you had German Jewish department store owners played a significant role in promoting several modern Christmas traditions, such as the Christmas tree. This tradition came from Germany in the 19th century, and Jews were important purveyors of German culture in America. Saylor notes that this long, amiable tradition of Jews helping to enliven a Christian feast day seems sadly to be drawing to an end. American Jews, those exemplars of successful assimilation, now seem to be de-assimilating, emotionally becoming increasingly resentful at this late date of their fellow Americans for celebrating Christmas. And veteran TV writer, Jewish, Bert Prolutsky wrote a column entitled "The Jewish Grinch Who Stole Christmas." I never thought I'd live to see the day that Christmas would become a dirty word, and I blame my fellow Jews. When it comes to pushing the multicultural anti-Christian agenda, you find Jewish judges, Jewish journalists, and the American Civil Liberties Union at the forefront. Being Jewish, I should report, Christmas was never celebrated by my family, but what was there not to like about the holiday? To begin with, it provided a welcome 2-week break from school. The decorated trees were nice. The lights were beautiful. It's a Wonderful Life was a great movie, and some of the best Christmas songs were even written by Jews. But the dirty little secret in America is that anti-Semitism is no longer a problem in society. It's been replaced by a rampant anti-Christianity. So there's nothing uniquely Jewish about minority groups de-assimilating. Human beings compete for status, and the most natural way to organize groups in the struggle is along lines of race, family relationships. So minorities are going to take their cue usually from the dominant majority. And if the dominant majority is not particularly interested in minorities assimilating, then minorities will say, oh, the way that we get status is by not assimilating. Oh no, I'm not muted again. Come on, man. I'm coming through loud and clear. I see that. So up until about 1965 or so, it was taken for granted by minorities from black to Jewish to Asian to Latino that they would do best in America if they assimilated. Since 1965, it's become increasingly common for minorities to de-assimilate, to take on names that the majority find distasteful or hard to pronounce, and then get mad at the majority if they don't know how to pronounce some exotic name. Yeah, Somalian refugees can wear Santa Claus caps. It was not uncommon for World War II for American Jews to exchange Christmas cards. Most Jews I know enjoy all the music, the lights, the TV shows, the movies. It's just an easy column to write for hack Jewish columnists. No one dislikes Christmas. And Coulter posted a Tim Keller sermon. Wow, I listened to the whole thing. Was it good? Bill Engrams finds that the phrase Happy Holidays took off with the release of the movie White Christmas. however, that Irving Berlin had to write a song about Christmas to have his biggest hit apparently illustrates the unfairness and oppressiveness of American majority culture. African Americans have similarly been de-assimilating, losing interest in facets of American culture that they cannot dominate. Now we have all these new immigrant groups, and the assumption is that they're just going to assimilate seamlessly. Hispanics, for example, may seem to many whites today to be perfectly content in servile jobs, but will future generations of Latinos seem so accepting of their lot in life? I've been reading some good books on these themes. Jews in the American Academy, 1900 to 1940, The Dynamics of Intellectual Assimilation. And then Revisiting History, Historicism and Its Discontents in German Jewish Thought. And Enlarging America, The Cultural Work of Jewish Literary Scholars, 1930 to 1990. So this latter book, I've got some notes here. These two books by Susan Klingenstein on Jewish scholars entering the world of English departments, which had historically been dominated by Anglo-Saxons. She focuses on two major American universities. And this seems illustrates some of my larger themes, that place is important, the context is important. So I'm very historicist. So what's going on in this time in history? Like, where are you? Who's writing something? For whom was it written? What was the audience? Who was writing it? What was the time? What was the context? Like these are important things for understanding literature, for understanding political movements. For example, the rise of the Nazis would not have happened as it did if you didn't have the rise to power of a totalitarian communist power on its doorstep and supporters of communism trying to take over inside of Germany. So Nazism and fascism between World War I and World War II was very much a response to the rise of totalitarian communism. Without the rise of totalitarian communism, we would not have gotten fascism in the form that we did. Now, the author here, Suzanne, she contrasts Harvard which is in Boston, outside of Boston, in the small town of Cambridge, with Columbia University. So Harvard is the biggest thing in its small town of Cambridge. Harvard is an octopus sprawled all over Cambridge with tentacles reaching deep into Boston. Once you're inside the Harvard world, it is very small, enclosed, and indrawn. It is a cerebral, peaceful place that is happy with itself. Its intellectual forces are centripetal. That means that the intellectual forces keep whirling tighter and tighter within the Harvard bubble. So the sense of having arrived at the top creates a soft, fuzzy generosity. Now, Columbia University in New York is located right outside of Harlem. So a very different environment. I have not read Ernst Nolte. I have read Paul Gottfried's book on fascism, which is largely based on the work of Ernst Nolte. Man, am I still muted? Nope, I'm showing up. Okay, you guys are freaking me out here. Right, Columbia University. Okay, it's located next to Harlem. It's a much more challenging urban setting. Challenging, I like that. Exciting, very exciting being next to Harlem, and has an exciting cosmopolitan environment. Yeah, whenever I think of Harlem, I think of exciting cosmopolitan environment. It accounts for its much tenser atmosphere. Are things tense at Columbia University right around Harlem? We had that Columbia female student who was murdered, knifed to death, just outside Columbia University a year or two ago. Students and faculty at Columbia seem always wired. The city is overcrowding the campus. New York, with its tough realities and extraordinary opportunities for stunning careers, is always there, even in a seminar on Shakespeare's sonnets. Columbia University is among the smallest things in New York City, always threatened to be overwhelmed by the city. The students measure who they are against the realities of New York City. Hence, Columbia's intellectual forces are centrifugal, so they are always spinning out rather than spinning in. They are shattered and refracted by New York City, the epitome of the real world. In a small, encapsulated, self-referential world of Harvard, the venting of passion disrupts communal harmony and is frowned upon. So generally speaking, Orthodox Jews, part of a tight-knit Orthodox Jewish community, they may not vent community secrets to the outside world. Right? Anything that you do that disrupts communal harmony when you live in Orthodox Judaism or any small tight-knit community is frowned upon. So that's true for Harvard, that's true for Orthodox Jews, that's probably true for tight-knit Seventh-day Adventist communities, any tight-knit community, right? Anything that disrupts the community harmony is frowned upon. But in a large open space such as at Columbia University, New York City, right next to Harlem, where people can get away from each other, passion creates variety and entertainment. People are more easily induced to act upon impulse, personal taste, and cultural or ideological preference. Columbia had room for the unfolding of many passionate souls. So until 1939, with Lionel Trilling's appointment at Columbia University, we did not have a Jewish professor of English literature on a tenure track. But by the mid-1970s, Jews had become so numerous in English literature departments, the situation invited satire. For instance, in A.R. Gurney. So A.R. Gurney is a WASP playwright and novelist who died just about 4 years ago. Wrote a funny novel, Entertaining Strangers, about MIT's beleaguered humanities division. And the WASP narrator finds himself surrounded by Jewish colleagues who evoke in him visions of a long line of dark, bearded Jews extending across the Atlantic into Europe, across Europe into the heart of Russia. Overwhelmed by the seeming omnipotence of the Jewish chairman of the appointments committee, holding on to the written letter of the law, the WASP narrator suddenly realizes what has happened to the American Literary Academy. I, the WASP, I was the outsider. I was really the guy standing hat in hand in front of the desk. I alone had escaped his pogrom. All my old buddies, all the amateur WASPs who had won the faculty tennis tournaments and coached the sailing team on the side and brought flowers to the secretaries around Christmas and danced the Charleston at departmental parties, all gone now from the humanities. Even the parties were gone. I was the last leaf, the remnant, me, Porter Platt. I gotta read this novel. It's called Entertaining Strangers. I think it came out in 1977. And here's just a little bit from. He has a play called Love Letters. So let's just play a teeny little bit of a performance of his play.
Not bad, eh? I got a letter from my grandfather telling me not to be first in my class because only the Jews are first. I wrote him and told him I wasn't first, but even if I was, there are no Jews here. We have a few Catholics, but they're not too smart, actually. I don't think you can be smart and Catholic at the same time. I was elected to the student council, and I'm arguing for 3 things. 1, I think we should have outside sports rather than keeping them all intramural. I think it would be better to play with Exeter than just play with ourselves. 2, I think we should have more than 1 dance a year. I think female companionship can be healthy occasionally, even for younger boys. And 3, I think we should only have to go to chapel once on Sunday. I think it's important to pray to be a better guy and all that. But if you have to do it all day long, you can get quite boring. If you get boring to yourself, think how boring you must be to God. I'm playing left tackle on the 3rd team, and I'll be playing hockey, of course, this winter. And I think I'll try rowing this spring, since I always stank at baseball. Now, I have to memorize.
Okay, so not a lot of Jews tend to play left tackle.
Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnberger See with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten, and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar keine Russin. Stamm aus Litauen. Echt Deutsch. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousin's, he took me out on a sled and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains,
there
I
you
was
feel
frightened.
free.
He
I read much of the night and go south in the winter. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust.
Eliot once wrote to me that he was greatly influenced by Beethoven's late quartets, that he'd play them on the gramophone again and again. And I can remember what he said in his letter. I wish that I could attain in poetry the same kind of suffering as Beethoven expresses in his last quartets.
So T.S. Eliot, not exactly a big fan of the Jews, but definitely the most important poet of the 20th century. So let's go back to Enlarging America, the cultural work of Jewish literary scholars. So Jews can enjoy Eliot, and many of T.S. Eliot's biggest boosters have been Jewish, because the enjoyment of poetry does not depend upon sharing its beliefs. On the other hand, the enjoyment of poetry is certainly enhanced when you share the beliefs it expresses. But for an appreciation of poetry or of art, the question of one's own acceptance or rejection of these doctrines is largely irrelevant. The point is really fundamental to understanding the nature of art from a rationalist Enlightenment perspective, that you can separate content and form, thought and aesthetics, and a poem that you may claim is anti-Semitic or misogynist or racist, it can still be a damn good poem. It's perfectly possible to have full literary or poetic appreciation without sharing the beliefs of the poet. So you can split off aesthetics from religion. You can split off aesthetics from morality. You can say, wow, Nazis had powerful aesthetics. I just don't like many of the things that they did. So this separation of ethics and aesthetics is kind of a belated acknowledgement of Enlightenment thought, and it's the condition for the full acceptance of non-Christians as interpreters of English and American literature. So a separation of religion and aesthetics, ethics and aesthetics, makes Jews and other non-Christians acceptable as teachers of English literature whose intellectual and spiritual basis had, until quite recently, been largely Christian. So T.S. Eliot wrote in 1919, "What I mean by tradition involves all those habitual actions, habits, and customs, from the most significant religious rites to our conventional way of greeting a stranger, which represent the blood kinship of the same people living in the same place." So that's not very politically correct today. 1932, Eliot noted, "Stability is obviously necessary. You're hardly likely to develop tradition, except where the bulk of the population is relatively so well off where it is that it has no incentive or pressure to move about. The population should be homogeneous. Where two or more cultures exist in the same place, they are likely either to be fiercely self-conscious or both to become adulterate. What is still more important is the unity of religious background. Reasons of race and religion combine to make any large number of free-thinking Jews undesirable." Now, in his personal life, T.S. Eliot was perfectly friendly with many individual Jews. But back to his thoughts. There must be a proper balance between urban and rural, industrial and agricultural development, and the spirit of excessive tolerance is to be deprecated. We must always also remember that, in spite of every means of transport that can be devised, the local community must always be the most permanent, that the concept of the nation is by no means fixed and invariable. It is only one fluctuating circle of loyalties between the center of the family and the local community and the periphery of humanity entire. Its strength, its geographical size depend on the comprehensiveness of a way of life which can harmonize parts with distinct local characters of their own. So T.S. Eliot said that to have tradition and really to have community, you need homogeneity of race and of religion. And Harvard got a president, Abbott Lawrence Lowell, circa 1919. He became president of Harvard University. He strongly opposed large-scale immigration of alien races. He believed that American social and political institutions could not survive in a heterogeneous society, and he was terrified of what the ever-swelling flood of immigrants might bring. So this is T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. The wasteland is what happens with diversity. So you can really
T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland is the most famous poem written this century and the high point of the modern movement in poetry. On the strength of it, Eliot was to become the most respected poet of his age, a cultural guru who in later life could attract audiences several thousands strong to his lectures. And though Eliot was to have several careers as dramatist, critic, publisher and editor, it was as the author of The Wasteland that he was always primarily known.
I can't think of any poem really as great as The Wasteland. It probably remains the most important poem, certainly of the early part of the 20th century in the English language.
I think his role in 20th century poetry is absolutely towering over everyone else. He's much better than Yeats. Much, much more inventive, much more brilliant, newer, simply newer. I mean, everything in 20th century poetry is founded on Eliot.
Thomas Stearns Eliot was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1888. He was a frail child, and from an early age he was cosseted and protected from the world. The dominant influence of his childhood was his grandfather, William Greenleaf Eliot, a Unitarian minister who instilled in the young Eliot a sense of moral propriety and public service. He had a happy childhood, and yet by the time he went to Harvard University, he felt a deep and unsettling need to break out of the provincial structures of his upbringing.
His family, the Eliots, were the aristocrats of that time in America.
Yeah, they were the aristocrats of St. Louis. So how does a Jew teach English literature? So to develop a relationship to Gentile culture, meaning Christian culture in America, to get access to its most inner sanctum, to get access to its most delicate regions, to its chain of ideas and ideological mechanisms, how do you do that without investing emotions and beliefs that are foreign to you? So you can read the literature of Christianity not as an immediate appeal to one's own identity, but as a series of metaphors, offering a distancing mechanism that allows the Jew to speak analytically rather than appreciatively about Christian culture. So looking at this book, Enlarging America, the Cultural Work of Jewish Literary Scholars. And there's a chapter on Harry Levin, who is a Harvard English literature professor, and he came from Minneapolis. There wasn't a whole lot of culture in Minneapolis. So the poet Alan Grossman, also from Minneapolis, noted Jews in Minnesota weren't going anywhere. There was no future for the mind in Jewish culture, at least not in Minneapolis. If you wanted to grow, you had to leave. So remember the default hypothesis of Nathan Kofnas presented in his critique of Kevin MacDonald. The primary reason for Jewish disproportionate success was high IQ. That probably accounts for about 70%, but that Jews tend to be located in large urban settings makes them more successful, because success in culture, success in writing, it requires constant interchange with other people in the same field, and you're much more likely to get that in a big city. So one of the reasons I love living in the city of Los Angeles is that pretty much every night I can go to some writer gathering. So I enjoy spending most of my spare time with writers. So the poet Alan Grossman went east in 1950 because Harvard was the only place I'd ever heard of. But Harry Levin, he went to Harvard. The lure of Harvard was irresistible. And he was quite happy there. So when he got off the train, the Harvard president, Abbott Lawrence Lowell, just a few months before, had preached his 20th baccalaureate sermon to the graduating class of 1929. And he'd taken his text from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 10. And it shall be when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he swore unto thy fathers, then beware lest thou forget the Lord who has brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. So he interpreted the text as America's mission and America's responsibilities as a preeminent nation was all about self-control, self-discipline, and energy, and about the obligation to make cautious use of America's bounty so that all mankind may be the better. Now, in Lowell's view, those who were chosen to participate in this noble enterprise could not just be any old immigrant who got off the boat. This mission, this American mission, needed to be entrusted solely to fundamental Americans, individuals who had assimilated to each other and become one homogeneous group by a singular experience. So the Israelites had a preparatory sojourn in the Sinai desert, and the Pilgrim Fathers had the preparatory crossing of the Atlantic. So Lowell was completely opposed to large-scale immigration of alien races. He was the national vice president of the Immigration Restriction League. He believed no democracy could be successful unless it was tolerably homogeneous. This is the president of Harvard. Served as president from about 1910 to about 1950. And he was certain that some Europeans could not be easily assimilated into American life. He also thought this was true of Asians, blacks, and Jews. He was skeptical of the abilities, really, of Southern Europeans, Asians, blacks, and Jews to assimilate. In a 1922 letter to the Christian scholar of the Talmud, George F. Moore, Lowell wrote, Jews who come to Harvard College should retain their Jewish characteristics, but on admission be overcome with an oblivion of the fact that they were Jews, even though all the Gentiles were perfectly aware that they were Jews. So Harvard and these other elite universities did not start out as elite secular universities. They started out as Christian seminaries. And even in the 1920s, 1930s, into the 1960s, there's still this notion that these essentially universities represented the goals and ideals of an American society, that America should be a unifying experience, that people should come together as one. There's an undertaking of a community of men with a common goal. Very different than the thinking now.
Life. Eliot, as he grew up in this rather large but closely knit family, was aware that the duties which would devolve upon him were those of commitment, public service, public law. These were commitments he never actually eschewed, and throughout his life you see manifestations of them in his various roles he chose to play. Now, in terms of his actual poetry, what you find in the years of St. Louis and the years when he was at Harvard is a poetry which is primarily concerned with gloom, with solitariness, with sexual unease. He's obviously a young man who wants to break out of that very close family situation, which was the condition of his life at that time, but didn't know how to do so. When he was at Harvard, for example, he would go on long, lonely walks through the slums of Cambridge, which was close by. But all the time you feel that he's on a lead and that he's going to be dragged back at any moment, back to the family life, back to the university life, back to all the ambitions his parents had for him. So you get the sense of a very civilized, elegant aristocratic young man, but one who was trying awkwardly, sometimes unsuccessfully, sometimes to rebel against that background.
Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit.
The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was Eliot's first major poem.
Okay, so there was this notion in among America's elite in the late 19th century into the 20th century that many Jews, particularly Jews from Eastern Europe, were just not clubbable, that they would not obey normal modes of interacting, normal customs, normal ways of thinking and speaking aloud, normal requirements of decent behavior in public, that they were just kind of gross. And so in Minneapolis, into about 1950, virtually no social club in Minneapolis would admit Jews. Minneapolis was known up to the 1950s as the anti-Semitism capital of the United States. And there were some Eastern European Jews who are a little over the top. Now, I don't know Donald Sterling's former owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't know his background. I'm going to suspect he was from Eastern Europe.
We're sitting courtside across from us at mid-court.
So Donald Sterling took over the San Diego Clippers circa 1981. He bought them for about $15 million, goes to his first game, does not exactly abide by the norms of the NBA.
You know, he was excited about the game and he was into it. And as the game progresses, his suit jacket comes off and then pretty soon his tie's loosened and he's excited and he's drinking wine and having a great time and, you know, enjoying the game.
Late in the fourth quarter, the Clippers led by 4 points. And it looked like they were actually going to start their season off with a win.
And then all of a sudden, one of the teams was shooting a free throw at the other end of the floor, and he came running across the middle of the court. The game was going on. He ran across the middle of the court and jumped into Paul Silas's arms.
That would be head coach Paul Silas.
You know, and Silas didn't know what to do. I mean, you know, he was like dumbfounded. He was like, what's going on? You know, it's like we were all just literally dumbfounded. Nobody knew what to do.
Right. So if you don't abide by certain cultural norms, then people may not want you to be a part of their club. So Donald Sterling arrived on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine in year 2000 as the worst owner in professional sports, right? Not just the NBA, in professional sports in the United States. Donald Sterling was regarded as the very worst because he had absolutely no concern for abiding by what were regarded as norms of decency, and then got into a little trouble when V. Stiviano, a black Mexican, she was primarily Latina, she was tape recording his calls. They were having an affair, and Sterling said all sorts of things that many rich Americans think, but they know that you're not supposed to say these things out loud. But again, Donald Sterling did not abide by the accepted norms of behavior.
Honey, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too.
I wish I can change the color of my skin.
That isn't the issue. You missed the issue.
What's the issue?
The issue is we don't have to broadcast it.
I'm not broadcasting anything. I don't do anything wrong.
Nobody said you did anything wrong.
I don't do anything wrong. If we ever have any issues, it's because people call you and tell you things about me that are not true.
Why are you broadcasting?
I'm not broadcasting
Why are you
anything.
taking pictures with minorities? Why?
What's wrong with minorities? What's wrong with black people?
Nothing.
What's wrong with these
It's
families?
like talking to an enemy. There's nothing wrong with minorities. They're fabulous. Fabulous. Because you're an enemy to me.
Why?
Because you don't understand.
I don't understand what.
Nothing.
That racism still is alive?
No, that there's a culture.
What culture?
People feel certain things. Hispanics feel certain things towards blacks. Blacks feel certain things towards other groups. It's been that way historically, and it will always be that way.
But it's not that way in my heart and in my mind.
So he doesn't realize you're not supposed to say these things out loud to your mistress when you know that she's recording you. All right? It's understood that everyone or many people are going to think this way, but you're not supposed to say these things out loud.
But maybe you want to adjust to the world.
But why? If the world doesn't do anything for me and they don't make me happy.
You're right. I don't want to argue with you. I don't want to argue.
I can't be racist in my heart.
Then that's good. I'm living in a culture, and I have to live within the culture. So that's the way it is. That's how I got it. I got the whole message. You live with your heart.
I don't.
You can't be flexible. You can.
I am flexible. I understand that that's the way you were raised and that's your culture, and I'm respectful and respectful.
Why do you have to disrespect them? Those are.
Who am I disrespecting?
The world before you.
Why am I disrespecting them?
By walking, you're perceived as either a Latina or a white girl. Why should you be walking publicly with black people? Why? Is there a benefit to you?
Is it a benefit to me? Does it matter if they're white or blue or yellow?
I guess that you don't know that. Maybe you're stupid. Maybe you don't know what people think of you. It does matter, yeah. It matters.
Do you know that I'm mixed?
No, I don't know.
You know that I'm mixed.
You told me you were going to remove those. You said, yes, I understand you. I mean, you change from day to day. Wow. So painful. Wow.
People call you and tell you that I have black people on my Instagram, and it bothers you.
Yeah, it bothers me a lot that you want to broadcast that you're associating with black people. Do you have to?
You associate with black people.
I'm not you, and you're not me. You're supposed to be a delicate white or a delicate Latina girl.
I'm a mixed girl.
Okay. Well, but
and you're in love with me. And I'm black and Mexican, whether you like it or not,
okay.
Whether the world accepts it or not. And you're asking me to remove something that's part of me and in my bloodstream because the world thinks different of me and you're afraid of what they're going to think because of your upbringing. You want me to have hate towards black people?
I don't want you to have hate. That's what people do. They turn things around. I want you to love them privately. In your whole life, every day you could be with them. Every single day of your life.
But not in public?
But why publicize it on the Instagram and why bring it to my games?
Why bring the black people to the games?
I really don't want to discuss anymore. It's over. I don't want to talk about it.
I'm sorry that you feel that way.
I feel that way so strongly, and it may cause our relationship to just break apart. And if it does...
Come on, this is America. You're not supposed to say these things out loud. Come on, man.
It's better to break apart now than to break apart later.
I'm sorry that you still have people around you that are full of racism and hate in their hearts. I'm sorry that you're still racist in your heart. I'm sorry that you live in a world that's still...
How about your whole life? Every day, you could do whatever you want. You could sleep with them, you could bring them in, you could do whatever you want. The little I ask you is not to promote it on that and not to bring them to my games.
I don't bring anyone to the game.
Okay, then. There's nothing to argue about.
I know.
Okay, we got a big problem here. I really don't feel like going anywhere. I don't feel like going to Europe. I don't feel like just going to the whole thing. We got to pay. If you didn't like someone that I was with, I would stop seeing that person.
I'm sorry, I don't have any more friends.
So Donald Sterling started out as a personal injury lawyer. He came from he came from poverty, right? He grew up in Boyle Heights, a poor, what was then a poor Jewish neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles. He worked very hard. His dad was in the junk business, so he would get up very early in the morning to help his dad in the junk business. He studied hard at school. He went to college. He graduated from law school. He became a personal injury lawyer. And then he started investing in real estate. He's made over $1 billion. He's a self-made man. He's made over $1 billion in real estate. So maybe he knows something about how the world works. And his big mistake is saying out loud what almost everybody takes for granted as true.
What would you like me to do? Remove the skin color out of my skin?
Is that a real issue, or are you making something up?
I mean, I just don't understand what the issue is.
There's nothing wrong with you or your skin color. Why are you saying these things? To upset me? Okay.
All he wants is for us to not bring black people to his games.
I'm sorry.
And not post
so sorry,
photos
too.
with them on
We made
Instagram.
a giant mistake, both of us.
I mean, he gave this woman millions of dollars
Everything you say to me is so painful.
to suck him off.
Do I want you to change the color of your skin? You know how to really hurt somebody. It's just...
I know a lot of Jews who are just like Donald Sterling. Like, they say all sorts of things that you're not supposed to say anymore.
Instead of saying, I understand.
I don't understand how you can have so much hate towards minorities.
I don't have any hate. I love them.
I cannot understand
Why would you say
how a
that?
person like you who's elevated, who's here, still feels above the world, and you can't even be seen with someone in which is considered of a different skin
They
color.
can be with me all day long, all night long.
I can't believe that a man who's educated, a man who's a scholar, a man
Well,
with...
believe it and stop talking about it. Let's finish our discussion with a period, okay? You're not making any good points. You can't believe this man. That's all I am. I'm not a good person in your eyes. If I was a good person, you wouldn't say, I can't believe this. I can't believe that.
What am I
Which
supposed
are all
to
lies.
say?
I love this.
Look at all this negativity coming from...
There's no negativity. I love everybody. I'm just saying, in your lousy Instagrams, you don't have to have yourself walking with black people. You don't have to. If you want...
Look, I'm morally superior to Donald Sterling because I dated an ex-porn star, and she'd done a lot of scenes with African-American men of color who appeared like they'd just been recently released from many years in prison. Well, okay, I did get upset about some of those scenes, and I remember telling a friend about one of those scenes in particular where she was working with two African-American gentlemen, and he pointed out to me, well, at least you know that she isn't racist.
To do it.
If it's white people, it's okay? If it was Larry Bird, would it have made a difference?
You're just a big fighter.
Yeah, Larry Bird is not HIV positive. Magic Johnson is HIV positive. That reflects the choices that they make. Like AIDS is an IQ test. COVID is an IQ test. Higher IQ people are less likely to get these devastating diseases because they make better choices.
I could see who would want to live with a woman like you. Who would want to live with a woman? Oh.
And she used to go around telling people she was going to be the next Mrs. Sterling.
All you ever wanted to do was fight. You're a born fighter.
I'm sorry that you're mad.
So Donald Sterling didn't exactly play by the rules.
I love my team. I live and die sometimes with every basket, especially towards the end of the game.
At the outset, Donald Sterling seemed genuinely enthusiastic, even if the ways he expressed it were a little strange. This is a guy who put up billboards all over San Diego to advertise his new team. But they were all plastered with pictures of himself.
Okay, so he's got a healthy self-esteem. I mean, come on, man. What's the problem?
You're the worst mouth.
Why are you so angry, honey? What's wrong?
Well, why would you bring up Larry Bird? What has he got to do with it? You can walk all night long with your sisters or your family.
I saw someone I admire Magic Johnson.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
He's made a lot of changes for his community, for the world, for the people, for the minorities.
This man,
He's
so
helped
I
a
didn't
lot
even
of
hear.
people.
Illness with women started landing him in hot water. 2 separate female employees sued him for sexual harassment. He settled with the first and won his case in court against the second. And then in 2002, Donald ended up in court with one of his mistresses, a young woman named Alexandra Castro.
He first denied ever even knowing the woman. Later, he testified that he barely knew her. Later, he testified she was a prostitute, and he had sex with her in the office, sex with her all over Europe, sex with her
Your
all
Honor, that
over
is
the
so
place.
untrue. That is such a lie. It is so...
Donald and Shelley first met Alexandra Castro in 1999 at a birthday party for Raiders owner Al Davis, the man who had given Sterling the blueprint for moving the Clippers to Los Angeles. Shortly after that party, Sterling and Castro entered into a relationship. Donald was 65 years old. Castro was 27.
The girl was providing sex for money. She was exciting. It was exciting, I have to tell you. And it was good. And it was delicious. And it was the best of the best. And maybe I morally did something wrong. But I did it.
Doug Bagby was Castro's attorney.
He was trying to embarrass Miss Castro and make her feel very uncomfortable.
Look, anyone who would not want Donald Sterling as part of their club or as part of their league is just an out-and-out anti-Semite. All right, this is a guy who's earned over $1 billion. He's just a class act.
Comfortable about being in a lawsuit with him because she did attend the deposition of Mr. Sterling, and she was sitting there, and he was making some highly defamatory, derogatory remarks.
Okay, so different groups tend to have different degrees of emotional expression, different degrees of emotional freedom. The different groups tend to vent at different rates. Some groups are much more expressive. Other groups are much quieter. Some groups are much more willing to talk in graphic detail about sex. Other groups are much more reluctant to talk in graphic detail about sex. So if you're a member of a group where your group, your people, your tribe is regarded as vulgar or is regarded as being way too willing to talk openly about the natural passions, such as the urge for sex, the urge for power, the urge for money, all right, Jews talk much more freely about the natural passions than do Christians, than do many other groups. So this causes many non-Jews to regard Jews as vulgar. But come on, what group, what league would not want upstanding citizens like Donald Sterling and his tribe to join them? All right? I mean, what's wrong with a little honesty here? What Donald Sterling is providing is honesty. How about fair play for Donald Sterling? And let's cut down on the anti-Semitism, guys.
About her during the deposition.
Donald's deposition was truly grotesque. Well, I fool around sometimes, I do, he admitted. When a girl seduces me and tells...
Why is this grotesque? This just seems honest to me. When did honesty become a crime? When did honesty become grotesque? I thought men were supposed to be able to express their feelings. Donald Sterling is simply in touch with his feelings. He's willing to tell you what he's really thinking about. He's willing to just lay it all out there. Like, when did honesty become a crime? When did love become a crime? When did blowjobs become the love that dare not speak its name? Like, is this guy supposed to be embarrassed that so many attractive young women want to suck him off? Is he supposed to, like, shy away from discussing that? I mean, the guy's a multi-billionaire. Of course, there are lots of young, hot, attractive women who want to suck him off. Is he supposed to cower in shame that this is true? Is he supposed to deny the reality of his tremendous charismatic power of these women, like, tracking him down ruthlessly, pulling his clothes off and just sucking the life out of him? I mean, yeah, I would like him to deny these women his essence. I feel like, yeah, morally, Jewishly, Judaically speaking, I would like him to deny them his life essence. All right? Don't let these non-Jewish women impurify your vital bodily fluids. All right? That's the high moral standard that I have. But am I going to stand here and condemn this man for his raw honesty? For being open, for being vulnerable, for just sharing what's on his mind and what's on his heart. Can I condemn him for that? No, I cannot condemn him for that. I cannot condemn him for being a man. And if you don't want this guy in your club, in your group, in your league, then you're an anti-Semite.
Tells me all of these hot stories and dirty things, and tells me how much she wants to suck on me and take my shoes off, and licks my feet and touches me. When I'm in a limousine, she takes off all her clothes. And the limo driver says, "What's going on?" And she starts sucking me on the way to Mr. Kuhn's.
What's grotesque about this? If there's anything grotesque here, it's these non-Jewish vixens who are taking advantage of Mr. Donald Sterling's kind heart and his emotional vulnerability, and that he likes getting his dick sucked. Right? Donald Sterling apparently was not asking these women to take off all their clothes and to suck him off in the limousine. These non-Jewish women were taking advantage of his kindly disposition and inflicting their blowjobs on him. And he's the bad guy? This is grotesque? Come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
And I thank her. I thank her for making me feel so good.
And he even thanks her. And he pays her. He thanks her. He pays her. He didn't pull a gun on these Sheilas. All right? He didn't beat them down. He didn't rip their clothes off. They're ripping their own clothes off. He's not grabbing the back of their head and forcing their head down unwillingly on his Jewish phallus. No, they are willingly, happily, with joy in their hearts and a smile on their face. They're going down on him. Then afterwards, he's saying thank you like a mensch, and he pays them well. And you call this grotesque? This guy recognizes the humanity of these women. He respects their humanity. He respects their enthusiasm. Like, how many men are married to a woman who is still enthusiastic about the blowjobs that they dispense? All right? That doesn't happen that much. So here he is. He's a multi-billionaire, and he keeps running into these nefarious young vixens, taking advantage of his kindly disposition. They can't wait to go down on him. And he says thank you, and he pays them off like a mensch. Oi.
Castro's attorney, Doug Bagby, had to interrupt him. Sir, the question was, is this your handwriting? Everything about the situation was as strange and uncomfortable as Donald Sterling using the word suck over and over again. This hadn't been your run-of-the-mill.
What's wrong with using the word suck over and over again? I thought in a deposition you're supposed to be honest. Right? There was a whole heck of a lot of sucking going on. And he's the bad guy for being accurate, for disclosing what's going on, for sharing what's on his heart and on his mind and on his penis. And this is somehow, when did honesty become grotesque? In America in 2020, did honesty suddenly become grotesque? Did emotional vulnerability in America in 2020, tell me, did emotional vulnerability become grotesque? Has it become verboten to say thank you after a woman sucks you off? Right? Is it now you're the bad guy if you shower her with gifts? Right? He's the bad guy. He's the grotesque guy because he says accurately, descriptively, non-judgmentally. He uses the word suck, and he's the bad guy? Come on, man. That's anti-Semitism.
Rich old guy and mistress arrangement. Castro drove Donald around. She cooked for him. She scheduled appointments for him. She got the weekend papers for him. Sterling asked her to bathe him and dress him, to brush his hair, to pick out his clothes. She claims that if she didn't put his socks on the right way, he would make her take them off
And he's the bad guy? Like, he gives women work. He's like employing women who probably don't have a whole heck of a lot of different job skills.
I have nothing more to say.
And I took a picture with someone I adore. He's helped a lot of people.
Why are you?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
He's made a lot of changes for his.
And V. Stiviano here, his girlfriend, is talking about all the wonderful things that HIV positive Magic Johnson has accomplished.
His community, for the world, for the people, for the minorities. He's helped a lot of people.
Why are you forcing this down my throat? I'm finished talking to you.
Yeah, does Donald Sterling, does he look like the type of bloke who's going to appreciate, this mistress of his, forcing this political correctness down his throat? Donald Sterling is not the type of guy who likes things shoved down his throat.
I have nothing more to say.
And I took a picture with someone I admire.
Good.
And he happens to be black, and I'm sorry.
I think it's nice that you admire him. I know him well, and he should be admired. And I'm just saying that it's too bad you can't admire him privately. And during your entire life, your whole life, admire him. Bring him here, feed him, him. I don't care. You can do anything.
Wow.
But don't put him on this event for the world has to see, so they have to call me.
Yeah, I mean, okay, he just doesn't want his mistress going on Instagram with dudes who are HIV positive. All right. I mean, is that too much to ask? He says he's fine if she Fs him, spends all the time that she wants. He simply wants her not to put it on Instagram. Is that too much?
And don't bring him into my games, okay?
I don't know him personally.
Come on, man.
Please leave me alone, please.
Please. He just wants to tell the truth and be emotionally vulnerable. And he's the bad guy.
In Sterling's analysis, he's not a racist. He was just jealous because the woman he was interested in was bringing other guys to the games. That also seemed to be his defense in a phone call that was released to Radar Online last week.
What the hell? I'm talking to a girl. The girl's black. I like her. I'm jealous that she's with other black guys. I want her. So what the hell can I, in private, tell her? I don't want you to be with anybody.
I wanted to hear more from Sterling about this idea that it was jealousy, not racism, that motivated him. Take a listen. Here's what I don't understand. I get you were saying you were jealous. You didn't want her being seen with other guys. You didn't want her being photographed with other guys. You thought she was kind of throwing in your face. That seems to be what you're saying.
Did you ever like a girl? Were you ever jealous of her a little bit if she was with other guys? It is. I didn't want her to be photographed. I didn't want her. I don't know where photographs go into it. I admit I was jealous, and it was stupid.
The thing is, though, what you were saying wasn't, I don't want you seen with other guys. You were saying, I don't want you seen with black guys.
Because she used the word black guys. I'm bringing some gorgeous black guys.
But in the tape, you're the one who brings up, you say that friends of yours are calling you up, telling her she's bringing black guys to the games. You say, and let me just read you so you can respond.
But it's all convoluted.
She says, then why are you taking, why are you taking pictures with minorities? Why? Later on, you say, it bothers me a lot. You want to broadcast that you're associating with black people. Do you have to? Then she says, you associate with black people. He says, I'm not you, you're not me. You're supposed to be a delicate white or delicate Latino girl. The question then is, why does being seen with a black person not make her a delicate white or delicate Latina girl?
I can't explain some of the stupid, foolish...
Right. Who hasn't said stupid, foolish things that you say when you're jealous? I mean, we all say things like this.
Educated words that I uttered. I don't know. You get upset, you say things.
One other thing you said, I'm just saying in your lousy expletive Instagrams, you don't have to have yourself walking with black people. You don't have to. If you want to, do it.
It doesn't make sense. I don't care. I didn't care.
Would it have been okay with you if she was bringing a white person to a game?
She had 4 seats. She brought a lot of people. I don't understand why in the world I said any of those stupid, uneducated remarks, because I really don't care who she brought to the game. I was more interested in the game. I was a little jealous, I have to admit, but I don't know why I said stupid things.
For a lot of people, though, these comments that were caught on tape do echo other charges that have been made in the past, as you know, by Elgin Baylor in other lawsuits.
No. You're trying to connect them.
No, I'm not.
Elgin Baylor has nothing to do with what the things I said 20 years later.
Well,
what did it have to do?
Well, Elgin Baylor made a claim that you had a plantation mentality, and then now in this thing, you're saying you feed these guys.
Yeah, so apparently a lot of his players didn't like it when Donald Sterling would come into the locker room and touch them and say, wow, look at your muscles. You're so muscular. You're so strong. You're a real buck. And they thought he was being like a plantation owner. And I think he's just being like Eastern European friendly.
I think you have more of a plantation mentality than I do. You know what? And I think you're more of a racist than I am. Because I'm not a racist, and I've never been a racist. I'll never be a racist. I don't know what that means to have a mentality. You're asking me about questions. What do you mean a mentality?
Well, to have a plantation mentality is to feel like you own these guys. They're working for you.
Do I own them?
I don't know.
My players earn $100 million a year.
But again,
now, do I own them?
But in this tape,
some of them own $50 million a year.
In this tape, you're saying I support them. I give them food, and clothes, and cars.
Well,
and houses.
I think I create opportunities for them so they can make $100 million. I don't give them anything, believe me. And those players could get that same amount of money anywhere else.
You acknowledge they earn that?
Of course they earn it, and they work harder than any other sport.
Well, Donald Sterling says that he has tons of support. He says the players still love him, and it's just the media that wants him out of the NBA. We'll have that part of the interview next. And later, this is probably the most surprising part of our conversation. Donald Sterling pretty much trashing Magic Johnson.
What's he done? Can you tell me? Big Magic Johnson, what has he done?
Well, yes, he's a business person.
He's got AIDS. Did he do any business? Did he help anybody in South L.A.?
Donald Sterling, it seems his downfall is a big result of the media. He told me that the players still love him. He has tons of support, he says, and that the NBA doesn't necessarily want him out. The question is he in denial? You can decide that for yourself. Here's how Sterling responded when I pointed out that the players on his team say they do not want to work for him.
Let me just say that I apologize to the league. People want me to hire a wall of lawyers and them to hire a wall of lawyers and to go to war. I don't think that's the answer.
So what are you going to do?
I think the answer is the league is a good league, all honest people. And I think that whatever they decide that has to be done, I think I should work with them and do it.
Well, the NBA says they want you out. Are you willing to give up ownership of the Clippers?
Well, I'm not sure that's what they want. And
that is what they want.
Well, that's your opinion, and that's what the media says. I'm a good owner. I have a good team. There are people that want to buy my team. But because the media says that the owners want me out doesn't mean that they want me out.
Have you talked to any of the owners, any of the other owners?
I've talked to some of the owners.
Have any of them supported you and said that they don't want you out?
Of course they support me. They can't understand why I would say that.
Right. Any league that does not want, any club, any league, any group that would not want Donald Sterling as a member is just anti-Semitic.
I can't understand why I would say.
So you're saying there are some owners of NBA teams who want you to remain the owner of the Clippers?
I don't speak for the league or for the owners. They speak for
But have
themselves.
any owners told you that?
I didn't ask them. I embarrassed the league. I humiliated them. I don't know why I did it. I mean, it's so terrible. And
So you don't believe, though, that the owners would vote to have you removed as owner?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
If they did, would you fight that in court?
We're not there yet, so why should
you don't believe the
fans don't hate me? Why wouldn't they like me when I'm respectful and I
when
treat them with
when they
dignity?
reversed their jerseys and didn't wear the
Well,
name
if
and they wore
one
black?
does that they love me. And they ask me, different media, are you a racist? I'm not a racist.
Well, Sterling's estranged wife certainly hopes to keep her 50% stake in the team, so the future of the Clippers own.
That I said to him, that I talked to him.
Okay, here he is
He
on
said
Magic
that he
Johnson.
spoke out publicly.
I'm hurt that he called me up and he said, don't do anything. Wait until you hear from me. Then somebody called me later and said he doesn't want to be involved. And then he released a tape that I said to him, that I talked to him in confidence. I didn't give any interviews. You were my interview. I'm deciding if I like you. No, but I mean, here is a man who's I don't know if I say this. He acts so holy. I mean, he made love to every girl in every city in America, and he had AIDS. And when he had those AIDS, I went to my synagogue and I prayed for him. I hoped he could live and be well. I didn't criticize him. I could have. Is he an example for children? You know, because he has money, he's able to treat himself. But Magic Johnson is irrelevant in this thing. He didn't do anything harmful to anybody, and I respect him, and I admire everything that he does. You know, I'd like to help even more if he would offer me an opportunity to help.
Okay, so the only reason you wouldn't want Donald Sterling on your team is because you are anti-Semitic. I mean, it's just so clear. All right, revisiting history. Historicism and its discontents in German Jewish thought by David Myers. A century and a half ago, Soren Kierkegaard issued a powerful indictment against one of the main pillars of modern intellectual life. So historicism, that essentially says you have to understand everything in its historical context. When you're looking at a work of literature, you need to understand who wrote it, when was it written, for whom was it written. And so when you understand things in their historical context, you are less inclined to proclaim that such and such is an eternal truth, is a transcendent truth. Instead, you tend to see things as context dependent. German Bible scholars call it understanding things in their Sitzum Leben. So that was a phrase I got a lot growing up. So Sitzen Leben. Yeah, famous Bible scholar term in biblical criticism. Sitzen Leben is a German phrase translating to setting in life. So you need to understand people, events in their life setting. Stands for the context in which a text or an object is being created and its function and purpose at that time. The Sitzen Leben also refers to the social, ethnic, and cultural setting of a site at a particular era. When interpreting a text, object, or region, the Sitzen Leben has to be taken into consideration to allow a proper contextual interpretation. So at its simplest, Sitzen Leben is just contextualization, describes what occasion certain passages in the Bible were written for, and is often called the genres of the Bible. So it classifies biblical material into letters, poems of lament, parables, psalms, and songs. It also has many other considerations: who the speaker of a passage was, his role in life, the nature of his audience. Taken out of its original context, the original meaning of a passage is lost. So, for example, a psalm may have its situation in the ritual of the temple court or in an artistic offering in the sense of injustice arising from a power structure in Jerusalem society in a particular place and time, or it may represent a lament in defeat. So finding the Sitzen Leben, finding the context, helps you to uncover what was really going on. All right, so the Sitzen Leben, for a counting rhyme like eeny, meeny, miny, mo, it's a group of children deciding among themselves who will play in a game. So when the children chant the song, we know that they are choosing who will play. But if we are unaware of this context, the rhyme appears merely to be nonsense about toes. All right, so Soren Kierkegaard, 150 years ago, issued a powerful indictment against one of the main pillars of modern intellectual life, which is historicism. Caught in the throes of spiritual turmoil, the Danish philosopher took aim at the kind of historical thinking that reduced human experience to a long series of disconnected moments. So historicism militates against the idea that history is inevitably building, it's progressing. So through historicism, we just simply see things in their historical context. We don't think so much about overarching transcendent truths or progress. And Kierkegaard reacted against this view of history as a long series of disconnected moments. This modern mode of thinking, historicism, reached its most offensive, Soren Kierkegaard lamented, when applied to the life and times and personality of Jesus. So Kierkegaard had thorough contempt for the efforts of European historians of his day to attempt a reconstruction of the life of the historical Jesus, whom they portrayed as a decidedly human figure born and raised in first century Palestine. So any normal Christian understands that Jesus was a figure in first century Palestine, but when you try to understand the historical Jesus, it takes away from the Jesus Christ of Christian theology. So as opposed to the historian, Soren Kierkegaard insisted that one can know nothing at all about the historical Jesus or the Christ. He is the paradox, the object of faith existing only for faith. But all historical communication is communication of knowledge. Hence, from history, one can learn nothing about Christ. You can learn about Jesus, but you can learn nothing about Christ from history. History makes out Christ to be another than he truly is. And so one learns to know a lot about Christ. No, not about Christ. For him, about nothing can be known. He can only be believed. So he's taking Jesus out of his historical context and instead looking at him as the figure of theological faith. So Soren Kierkegaard feared that the most sacred and transcendent of realms had been infected by a destructive contagion, historicism, and the practice of modern critical history. The historian's careful measurement of change over time, for instance, in depicting the history of Christianity after Jesus, obscured for Kierkegaard far more than it illuminated. Kierkegaard felt compelled to emphasize again and again that in matters pertaining to the divinity of Christ, the 1800 years have nothing to do whatsoever with the case. Powerful and poignant as it was, Kierkegaard's plaint was hardly the first and surely not the last of its kind. Criticism of modern historical thinking has been almost as common as the thinking itself. Frequently, it's been trained on the quest for the historical Jesus, as in Albert Schweitzer's well-known book of that English title from 1906. Albert Schweitzer, a German medical doctor and historian, was far more immersed in and sympathetic to historical knowledge on Jesus than Soren Kierkegaard, but at the end of the day, the renowned missionary physician arrived at a conclusion fairly similar. Namely, it was not Jesus as historically known, but Jesus as spiritually arisen within men, who is significant for our time. But what exactly was so distasteful? What was so unsettling about modern historical thinking? What prompted scholars of different disciplines and denominations to attack it with such fervor? In the first instance, it was history's ubiquity. Friedrich Nietzsche bemoaned this fact in his famous 1874 essay on the use and abuse of history, when he wrote of the dangerous surfeit of history. Half a century later, Ernst Troeltsch, the German Protestant theologian, called attention to the historicization of all our knowledge and perception. So this is a complaint against historicism because it tends to reduce awareness of the transcendent, the overarching in history. Nietzsche and Troeltsch realized that one could hardly think of an event from the past without relying on the causal logic of modern historicism. This logic dictated that each event be understood as an individual unit, assessed on its own terms and according to its own unique development. And caught in the fast-moving current of history, events floated like petrified wood, drifting in no particular pattern or direction. So when you use a historical mindset, you're much less likely to see progression in history. Each discrete event had its own distinct properties. The aggregate of such events yielded no coherent design. So if you want to find coherent design in history, you have to come with the eyes of faith rather than with the eyes of historical scholarship.
He wrote it when he was 23, while still a student at Harvard, and it immediately marked him out as a poet of unique originality.
What Eliot gave them was irony and bathos and anticlimax, and also this extraordinary use of imagery in his poetry. If you take the beginning, what you have is the first of the modernist trumps. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. What Eliot is doing here is taking an old cliche, the red sky at night is a shepherd's delight, and turning it through 75, 130 degrees, something like that. I mean, just swiveling it so you don't see it in quite the same way.
You have here a recognizable voice, but quite an unusual one. It had never been heard before, certainly not in English poetry, where his contemporaries in England, and to a certain extent in America, were still lost in a kind of late romantic twilight, where expressions of public disorder were matched only by expressions of private disorder. There's a certain breakdown in the value system, so the language seems thin and etiolated as a result. Here you have a poet and a poem seems very sure of himself, very sure of what he's trying to do, and very sure it's got his act together, as they say. And this came as a profound shock. When Harold Monroe was shown the poem by Comrade Aiken, he said it was absolutely insane. Now, what he meant by that was it didn't conform either melodically or thematically with anything he was used to reading.
There will be time. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create. and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate, time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare? And do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse.
Okay, so here's some commentary on this excellent book by Professor David Myers, Revisiting History, Historicism, and its Discontents in German Jewish Thought. Historicism was born as a specifically German romantic reaction against the Enlightenment's idea of a single universal human nature. The historicists faulted this notion for neglecting important differences of culture and tradition, as if truth was something atomistic and dissociable from its surroundings. The historicists championed instead a version of contextual holism. The meaning of an idea was determined entirely by the historical horizon, which it was the duty of the historian to reconstruct. Times the contextualist emphasis verged on relativism. It's when the great German historian Leopold von Ranke declared that all epochs are equally close to God. At other times, however, historicists saw the various moments of history as strung together according to an evolutionary principle, such as mystical pantheism, or in the attempt to show how German nationalism emerged from and rejected cosmopolitanism. Whether these two tendencies, relativist and evolutionist, could cohere into one doctrine is not obvious. Isaiah Berlin tried to show that Herder is often seen as an early historicist thinker with generally pluralist and cultural outlook, but to do so he minimized Herder's idea that some cultures were superior to others. So historicism then means different things, and some critics dissenting from part of the doctrine don't necessarily reject all. So author here, David Myers, uses historicism in its biggest sense, and he focuses on 4 German Jewish thinkers at the turn of the 20th century. One of them, Franz Rosenzweig, who argued that Jews exist beyond profane history and that Jewish life exemplifies eternity in the midst of time. David Myers is also the author of Reinventing the Jewish Past, an indispensable study of the so-called Jerusalem School, which was the most consequential institution of Jewish historical scholarship in the 20th century. It's a fitting irony now that David Myers turned a historical eye upon those modernist philosophers and theologians who resisted rather than reinvented Jewish history. But these two movements turn out to be two sides of a single coin. Myers readily acknowledges the irony that he's writing a history of thinkers who sought to escape history. He grants that all of these ostensibly anti-historicist thinkers, in fact, occupied a rather more complex middle ground, while their objections to historicism often resemble or even reiterate the traditionalist view that the Jews uniquely inhabited the realm of sacred history. Myers notes that all 4 of the book's major figures were trained in the modern university. They found it impossible to avoid the methods and logic of historicism. They invariably constructed historical narratives to chart their own theological or philosophical course. Their best anti-historicist intentions were tempered by deeply ingrained and ultimately inescapable historicist impulses. So his true thesis is that there is no real escape, since historicism permeates our very mode of cognition, our way of ordering and explaining the past. The thinkers that David Myers has picked out for sustained attention are by no means ahistorical or even anti-historical, and though they were deeply troubled by historicism, they could hardly forswear its logic. They were protesting too much. It is indeed resistance in the psychoanalyst sense, an inner cathexis that shows up as outward hostility. So that's a book review on this excellent David Myers work.
For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume?
Prufrock is a genuine creation. He is J. Alfred Prufrock. And this is actually slightly different from being Thomas Stearns Eliot. I think Eliot was a rather sophisticated human being. Clearly, a man who was reserved. Virginia Woolf once sent an invitation out saying T.S. Eliot would be here in his four-piece suit. Clearly people saw this, but I think actually a man capable of great passion and not ridiculous, not at times almost the fool.
Well, he was always someone who liked to play roles, even from an early age. People who knew him well, and even people who didn't, noticed that he was, as it were, as V.S. Pritchett said, a company of actors within one suit. His life, in a sense, was a continual parading of roles on masks, and this certainly began when he was at Harvard, where he posed, as it were, as the young dandy. That was one of his great poses. He could also pose as the religious mystic. That was another phase in his life. So the adoption of these dramatic personae in the early poetry would, I think, have come quite naturally to him. In fact, it has been said, and could even be proved, that Eliot is the greatest dramatic poet of our period. You can interpret his early poetry, and certainly you can read it, as a series of dramatic monologues by various characters coming on the stage of Eliot's consciousness. Certainly, that was what immediately struck his contemporaries about that kind of work. And certainly that was the reason why it seemed so different from the kind of work which was being produced by English writers at the same period.
Okay, revisiting history, just a few more sentences. The state of fragmentation pointed up another major concern issuing from historicism, the problem of relativism. According to their critics, historians went about evaluating each event on its own terms and never set in place any overarching standard of measurement. They were captives of their own context and thus incapable of achieving anything but a relativist or relational perspective on the past. Constrained by such a perspective, they produced an endless string of historical pearls, each carefully polished and catalogued, but at the same time constant reminders of a certain fall from a state of wholeness. In this fallen state, it was no longer possible to assert spiritual or moral truths with certainty. For, in the language of historicism's critics, this condition marked a descent from supernaturalism into naturalism. Following centuries of tumultuous theological struggle, modern historians now asserted their right to displace God as the primary causal force in history. Borrowing liberally from natural scientific models, they anchored historical causation in a wide array of natural or human forces. The result was a steadfast alliance between naturalism and historicism, the two great scholarly creations of the modern world.
And would it have been worth it, after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelains, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead. I have come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all. If one settling a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor? And this, and so much more. It is impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves in patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one settling a pillow, throwing off a shawl, and turning towards the window should say,
reason to hesitate. They viewed the people they sold not as fellow Africans, but criminals, debtors, or prisoners of war from rival tribes. By selling them, kings enriched their own realms and strengthened them against neighboring enemies. African kingdoms prospered from the slave trade, but meeting the Europeans' massive demand created intense competition. Slavery replaced other criminal sentences, and capturing slaves became a motivation for war rather than its result. To defend themselves from slave raids, neighboring kingdoms needed European firearms, which they also bought with slaves. The slave trade had become an arms race, altering societies and economies across the continent.
Did you know that Muslim slavers took more blacks out of Africa than did European slavers?
Well, evil business is not something that I really really want to promote as business.
Well, neither. I hate abortion. That's business. Abortion is murder. That's an enterprise.
I agree with you. I don't back that. I don't think it's right to do that.
No, it's an evil business. And at that time, those black people, you're saying they did it because they had no choice. No, they did it because they wanted money. Those individuals are not. You're collectivizing all black people as good.
They had no choice. It was do it or we kill you. They had no choice. And the reason why I say that is because we spoke about that before. That's how Europeans got into the oil business of black countries. It was go there by force. If you don't show a black face, but it's white ownership, we will kill you.
I must acknowledge my conversation with David is probably one of my favorites. We disagreed on several issues, but it was always extremely friendly. And as I stated earlier, he was just a giant teddy bear. Let us move on to the next subject. As reiterated previously, a project like this would not be balanced without the perspective of minorities. Thus, aside from David, I also accrued the wisdom of a Hasidic Jew. He goes by the online moniker of Doov, with 4 O's, and runs a small interfaith program in the greater Detroit metropolitan area. Additionally, Doov has more than overtly done the rounds, so to speak, on many different alternative media sites, podcasts, and general YouTube streams, buttressing the position of the Jewish people at large, including against those of the unabashed alt-right, racist, anti-Semitic stance. Doov in particular is a proud Jew and encourages and advocates for multiculturalism in the United States, yet, nevertheless, ostensibly opposes it for Israel. Strangely enough. Here was a partition of our discussion.
I kind of enjoyed defending the Jews. I grew up in urban, multicultural places.
I don't think Doov opposes multiculturalism for Israel, so she's incorrect.
I would say demographic change had largely already occurred when I was a child, just that whites were a minority already.
Oh, that's not a bad thing. I feel like this is where a lot of people get in trouble. It's like the white nationalists want to be able to defend their race preservation, which I don't actually find offensive. I'm like, well, if the Japanese want to stay Japanese and have a homogenous nation and the Jews can do it in Israel, then yeah, the white people should be able to do it too. I don't really care. I think that's fine. So, but what I don't like about the dynamic there is that, it's okay for Jews to enjoy that, and it's okay for me as a Christian to want to, be a bit of an apologist for my own ideology, not necessarily for my own people. I don't really collectivize myself in that manner. What are your feelings towards what I'm saying? Do you think if Israel or the Jewish nation or the Jewish ethnic group, whatever the wording is you want to use, if it's okay for them to be apologists and to enjoy doing what you do, then every other group should be able to do that too, right?
I mean, that would sound logical, yes, and reasonable. Yes. In practice, in politics, things might play out differently, and certainly in strategy, you may be group conflict or competitive strategy. Your fairness doesn't necessarily play out that yes, it could be that Jews would promote open immigration and multiculturalism in America and oppose it in Israel, and you would say somewhat, well, isn't that hypocritical? Possibly, but there is a logic to it because as a minority in a foreign society, usually promoting things like multiculturalism and immigration benefit minority groups, and in a majority country like Israel, usually promoting things like multiculturalism and immigration tend to not benefit the majority group. So whether it's hypocritical or not doesn't underlie the basic logic that it makes sense that people would think and behave like that.
I'm not really sure what you're saying. Are you saying you're saying it is logical, but then there's a lot of other words. So are you saying that are you admitting that Jews help multiculturalism in America? Is that what you just said? So because it did break up a bit. I mean, you're saying you're advocating for immigration, which I didn't realize you meant literally. Why does it concern you and the certain Jews that do that? What does it? Why not focus on Israel? Why not focus on the country that where your spiritual homeland is, where your heart is? Like, why not focus on that and leave America to America, leave Canada to Canada, leave Australia to Australia? Like, I don't understand why. I don't know why double. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, it makes sense.
And I'm an immigrant's children. I'm an immigrant's daughter saying that.
When people advocate their own self-interest, so Jews there's the religious nature of what does it mean to be a Jew? What does the Jewish religion teach? And then, so to say, the collective best interest of the Jewish people in diaspora, and the trajectory that the majority population of Jews was in Europe for a large period of time.
Yeah, I think she's getting a little frustrated because Doov doesn't usually or often does not answer directly the question that you ask. He answers with the points that he wants to make, and these points may not address the question that is asked.
And then in North America, split from to Israel and North America, and that Jews in North America have different interests than Jews in Israel that would lead to different issues. And obviously Jews who are not native to Europe, we're not native to North America, it makes sense that we're pro-immigration because that's we're immigrants. And there's other people that might have a different narrative, but the logic seems pretty clear, just like self-interest.
Why doesn't Israel then invite multiculturalism? Why don't they have more Chinese people? Why don't they have more Hispanics? Why is it only the Western world? And I don't understand.
Okay, so I'll answer the question for her. The Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern European origins who tend towards left-wing policies in the United States tend towards those same left-wing policies in Israel. So in the United States, about 90% of the Jews in the United States are Ashkenazi. In Europe, in Israel, about 40% of the population is Ashkenazi. So there are a lot more proportionately of Sephardim and Mizrahi Jews who do not tend to be left-wing social activists. So the same basic Jews have similar politics. The same race of Jews have similar politics in the diaspora and in the Jewish state. It's just that the proportions of Jews is different. So the type of Jews who advocate multiculturalism for the United States, their cousins in Israel advocate multiculturalism for the Jewish state as well. The Jews in America who want more immigration into America, they want more immigration, non-Jewish immigration into Israel. The Jews in America who want to expel illegal aliens want to expel illegal aliens in the Jewish state as well. So Jews aren't just one monolithic group. There are various races of Jews. There are Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews, and the makeup, the proportions are different in the United States than they are in Israel.
Well, the answer should be obvious. If you're saying, how is it that Jews are hypocritical as a critique? But the answer should be obvious because it's not in their best interest. That Jews in America are pro-immigration and multiculturalism because it's in the best interest of Jews in North America, as where Jews in Israel are generally anti-multiculturalism and anti-immigration in Israel because it's against their best interest. It's your vision of what does it mean to help the U.S., but if you're from a minority status, you need a footing in society to be, I belong here, I'm part of society, to make society a better place. If you have no standing, I'm not a citizen, I'm not welcome here, it's going to be more difficult to try to make society a better place.
But if you're pushing for something and perpetuating something, you're helping the bigger machine. I think the issue that certain white nationalists claim is that they don't want to become a minority. And so the more one keeps promoting multiculturalism, which I don't believe works.
Okay, so there's not a universal Jewish answer on multiculturalism. First of all, 99% of Jews are not political activists. And of those Jews who are political activists, yeah, many promote multiculturalism, but also many oppose it. So you'll find Jews on both sides of these major political questions.
I think multiracialism is all right. I think multiculturalism is mixing things. You know, you come to another country, you've left the things that you've done behind, keep it in your household. But once you enter America or Australia, you learn English, you get a job, and your culture is no longer relevant unless it's kept in your home. Multiculturalism is the meshing of a whole bunch of different cultures, and some of which don't work. Some people don't circumcise their kids. Some cultures circumcise women or little girls. Some people think it's okay to eat cats. Like, you can't multiculturally join all of these things together. It doesn't make sense. So I'm not an advocate for multiculturalism at all. Multiracialism, I'm fine with. So I don't think white people want to die out, but it seems that only white countries are the ones who are generous and giving enough to allow it. And then those who enter the country don't appreciate all of their amenities. They don't appreciate all of their pleasures. It's like they're laughing at us. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm not disagreeing with the critique, and I've debated many people who've said over that critique, and I accept that there's group conflict, and I'm not prescribing to people what they should do. I'm saying this is my opinion in my area.
Yeah.
And I act in Detroit, and I'll voice my opinion that I do favor multiculturalism. I see the benefit of it.
I wanted to get into a little bit of Judaism and something else I wanted to touch on as well. I forgot what it was now. Crap, I lost it. Oh, that's right, collectivism. My issue that I have with racism, generally speaking, and people who hate other groups, is the collectivization. It's like, I understand why it's done. It's not like I don't get it. I understand that there's a pattern of behavior that can be attributed to a certain group. So like what Black people, fantastic runners, Asians really good at maths. Like each and every group has its thing. Like Jews are very sciencey, very, very, very intelligent in that manner. But what I don't like is this perception that the far right racists have is, and they say, yeah, I'm racist. Like, it's not like a hidden thing. It's like something that they say out loud, like freely. That the Jewish people are, they have a particular nature, and that nature is one of being shrewd and you can't trust Jews. And I think in my head, I often think that they're contradicting their own argument, because on an individual level, what the white people are seen as slave owners. Even today, black people want reparations, or at least a portion of society claims that. But not all white people owned slaves. Only 3% of the population owned slaves. And so it sounds odd, and it makes sense to me when a white person gets annoyed, because they're like, I didn't own you. I don't own you now. That's ancestors ago, and I don't even know if my family owned slaves. So when the Jewish people do it, I find that unusual as well. Like, I don't understand why people collectivize in that manner. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the question of consciousness or origins of people, and to some extent these are unanswered questions by science and why people do things. What's the origin of groups? What does even race mean? If there's such a thing of race, what's the origin of people? They're saying, was there Noah and his 3 sons as the progenitor of humanity, or evolution? And we all came out of Africa and the migration, and how did we break into these various tribes and differentiate? And I mean, there's a lot of theories, but these questions remain largely unanswered.
I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't been a beneficiary of multiculturalism and that immigration hasn't helped my family along. But I don't think that if I was in Spain or Colombia, which is what the products that where I'm from, I don't think I'd be suffering a whole lot. I think I'd be fine. I'd be speaking in Spanish more often and all that kind of stuff. But my only point is that what I'm trying to actually get you to acknowledge or not acknowledge is that I don't understand how a white nationalist can say, look what we built, when it had nothing to do with them. They didn't personally build that. So I find that unusual. It's like when people say about the Jews, they killed Christ. I'm like, no, they didn't. I said the ones back then might have, but why hate the Jews today for something that happened biblically 2,000 years ago? That doesn't make sense. The ones of today are not the ones of the past. And also it was the Romans. Why do you forget that? Like, I'm trying to say that collectivism isn't always wise, but I'm not really understanding your answers. They seem a bit wishy-washy. I would like a clear response, please.
Well, that's kind of a Jewish theology here, and you're getting something like, I had rabbinic training, and I'm a philosopher.
Yeah, I know you did.
And a lot of people call it pilpul, which is like a Jewish method of intellectualism, where you kind of get both sides. Where you can't get a clear answer out of a Jew, and it's not.
I wasn't saying that. I'm just saying you specifically. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know Jews did that. You're bringing it all to the stereotypes. I'm actually trying to go against the stereotype and say that you are an individual. You are God made you in His image, and you are an amazing individual who has your own specific likes. You are not your collective, just as I am not all Latinos. I don't do cocaine. I don't really dance particularly well. My hips don't lie. Whatever. Like, I'm trying to say something very specific, but I'm not really understanding your responses. That's all. I'm actually saying positive things. I'm saying very positive things, but I don't think you're reading it that way. I don't know. I'm struggling to get a clear answer from you.
It's probably just my style in my theology towards life, because from my perspective of free will or how people make decisions, it's not surprising to me that people make poor decisions and do the wrong thing. So if you're asking me, why do people make bad decisions?
No, I'd never ask that.
I would say, well, because human nature.
Unfortunately, the multiculturalism of which you speak and seem to advocate so heavily for has caused nothing but rapes in my father's country, as it has in Sweden. Sweden is the #1 rape capital now because of so much Islamic immigration, and so that's why I'm not a fan of multiculturalism anymore. But just back to the collectivism, I want to finish off on it. I was trying to give you an out, and in fact, you validated the white nationalist concept of collectivism. So I find that a very interesting connection that took place right there. So I just wanted to move on a little bit to Judaism. I think the Torah and the Tanakh are fantastic books of the Bible, because as a Christian, of course, I take lessons from the same prophets that you take lessons from, and I think it's beautiful. But I find the Talmud to be a little bit different. I don't see it as. I think the Talmud is a Pharisaic influenced book, and I feel like the Judaism from the Talmud to the Tanakh, and then you move on to the Talmud, it's so vastly different. I would think that a Jewish person would happily, and this is just me, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to hear your response. I would think that a Jewish person would be happy trusting in the Torah and the Tanakh, but then would think to question the Talmud, because in the book of Isaiah we learned that there was a Messiah to come, and then when this Messiah came, he was rejected, even though the old books of the Bible predict that there would be a savior, and he died for my sins, he died for your sins, he's the most incredible human being that ever lived on the planet.
Yeah, so a few different issues. I mean, yes, generally the Talmud is considered to be the work of the Pharisees, and the claim that the Pharisees were basically always correct. And the view of the prophets, the understanding of the prophets, that the Pharisees were in fact the true guardians, until today are the true guardians of the Hebrew prophets. What
do you mean?
Meaning, God spoke to Moses. I mean, from the Bible, commanded the Jewish people to obey a certain law, and
that's the Talmud.
That's the. Well, I was saying that's if you're a Jew and a believing Jew, that's that's our religion. That's possibly even historical.
But that's from Moses. I would equate that to the Ten Commandments, where the Constitution of Israel was established. I would say that the Torah and the Tanakh would be the equals. That would be that equation. Whereas the Talmud came after, and doesn't it actually?
Because the prophetic system of Moses lays out a system of having the sages and leaders of the generation. So it wasn't just like a Protestant view, like the prophet spoke, and then the Jews would just read the words of the prophets forever. The Moses himself and the prophets, you have judges and
Joshua.
There was a system established by Moses to have the leadership of the generation, the running of a temple, the priestly class, and the various things. And after the destruction of the second temple, the Talmud is, at least the claim is that the Pharisees are the legitimate continuation of the true sages of the generation that had been passed down from the prophets. Like, it's a disciplic relationship.
If you had a choice, between America and Israel, and you had to choose your allegiance, who would you choose? It should be a quick answer. It should be America. So it's Israel.
No, it depends on the scenario. So your average American, Judge Brandeis. I mean, there's a lot of dispute, and just because Jews have conceived it, and some American, politicians and Christians have agreed, but no, I mean, I could be pro-Israel and a good American. In fact, by being pro-Israel, there's no conflict, and obviously there could be disputes, and there's people who could view America in a different way, like America first, and that's why generally, even though Trump was pro-Israel,
are you America first? No, you're Israel.
I'm not political. I'm not really political like that. So it's like I'm God first. I fulfill my duty to my country. I'm not anti-American. I fulfill my duty to my country.
I didn't say you were
anti-American. I pay my taxes. I follow the law.
So do I. I do all of those things.
But I have my opinions that are more theological and not really political. And yeah, I do believe that eventually my lot will be in Israel. Like I was saying to my parents, I would like to be buried in Israel. Like, although I don't know when I'm going to move to Israel, but like, yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm not fluent, but yeah, I speak Hebrew.
Oh, you'll get there.
And but I mean, no. I mean, currently my lot is in America, even though theologically, I see my lot eventually being in Israel. And conceptually, as an American Jew, I need an America that allows me to be an American Jew like that. So if white nationalists say that like Doov, you can't get away with being in America with that viewpoint, that's why we're pushing back. That's why Jewish organizations are pushing censorship. That's why we're at the town hall fighting these things so hardly, because that's our group interest. That's saying that's largely. I mean, there are different Jewish strategies. Jews could assimilate. Jews could try to do various. But I'm saying the mainstream Jewish strategy is like, yes, we do care about Israel, and we are we do want to be loyal.
There's nothing wrong with caring about Israel.
But yes, our heart lies in Jerusalem. And at the end of the day, most Jews would think that eventually at some hypothetical point, our lot is going to be in Israel, not in the nation we're in.
So Israel is where your heart is. Like, if you had a choice, it's obviously going to be Israel because of the theological, spiritual connection that you have to there. America is just a temporary home.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on the situation. So I'm saying yes.
I'm not giving you a situation. I'm giving it as a very blatant blank slate. So it's a pretty basic question. You didn't really. So
wait, there's no implications. You're saying like therefore you can't trust a Jew to act in a patriotic way.
I didn't say that, and I don't believe that. I'm not in that category of person who thinks you can't trust a Jew. I've never said that. You're putting words into my mouth. You're claiming.
Free will also. So obviously there's millions of Jews who all make up our own minds in various ways. There's polling. And
I love Jews. I have nothing against any of them.
And generally, yes, the Jews poll. Vast majority of Jews would say yes. Of course, our hearts in Israel.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't understand why it took you so long to respond to that. Someone said to me,
if you're Latinx, you say like, maybe your hearts, maybe because there's not a religion associated to it. And if you're Christian, there's no reason for your heart to be like in South America or in Spain. But if you're a Jew, by definition, our heart's in Israel. Like, of course, like I'm a Jew by definition. Of course, my heart's in Israel.
Yeah, well, that's I asked the question. It could have been very easily responded to, but
because we get defensive. Because
you got defensive, yeah, which I found unusual.
As an aside, Doov emphasizes that he is first and foremost a lover of the Almighty and of all forms of wisdom that promote harmony between mankind and God consciousness. However, it is not lost upon me the seeming contradiction of his advocacy for multiculturalism in majority white Gentile Western countries, juxtaposed with his exhortation to keep Israel homogenous, whilst actively assisting the.
Okay, there was no exhortation there to keep Israel homogenous. Doov is not a Zionist, right? Doov is not. He gives very little attention to Israeli politics. Doov does not answer any questions straight on, generally speaking. He just he has his own meandering style. So
the United States in this undertaking. Some would contend that once his work in the Western world is complete, he will perpetually have a default ethno-nationalist land always there to welcome him. Thus, the accusations of world Jewish supremacy and double standards, as the Calgary Plan and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion would allege.
Okay, so if she just heard more of Doov doesn't have any support for the current secular state of Israel, if I understand Doov. So he's not a Zionist. He's Haredi in that respect. He believes that you should only have an independent Jewish state, I believe. Well, I think she's imputing. Let me just say, I think she's imputing beliefs to Doov that he doesn't hold.
Allegedly exemplify. To his credit, he is often predominantly targeted by white racists to inform him of the various cruel methods in which they envision death for him and for other Jews. Although I will not personally deny some of the stereotypes that he does appear to represent, example, the dialectical manner of his long-winded discourse, and his classically orthodox or even vaguely Hasidic look, nevertheless, Doov is a human being, and despite how much I may disagree with some of his multicultural, borderline globalist views in some cases, he still undoubtedly deserves the same respect and kindness that anyone else does. Our next subject is reviler.
Okay, so she was also talking there about what about the Talmud? She doesn't like the Talmud. She likes the Tanakh, meaning the Hebrew Bible. So it's like saying, I like the Star-Spangled Banner, but I don't like the vehicle code, right? They're two different things. One is a poetic work, one is a literary work, and one's a legal work. So you can't have any group of people and a way of living for that group of people, particularly as it becomes more and more numerous. And remember, at the time of the creation of the Talmud, there are about 10 million Jews in the world. So you need rules to legislate and to direct how those people will live their lives. So there's no nation of 10 million people that doesn't have equally specific rules akin to the Talmud, right? You may love the United States of America and the Declaration of Independence, even the Constitution. That does not mean that you would enjoy reading, a detailed book of, say, California's code for driving, right? It's incredibly specific, detailed. You're not going to enjoy reading it. So too, the Talmud is frequently very specific, legally oriented, just like a vehicle code. But a people produces poetry, and a people produces song, and a people may produce, stirring historical allegories or stories, but a people also needs a legal system. And what the Talmud provides is the basis for a legal system for the Jewish way of living.
That is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all.
Prufrock, I think, anticipates the wasteland in two ways. One is thematic, and the other one is in terms of technique. In terms of theme, it introduces what is actually the theme of a great deal of Eliot's poetry, right up through the wasteland into the Hollow Men, and it's the theme of the failure to live. If you think about Prufrock, he's an incredibly inhibited man emotionally, who is, whatever the turmoil inside, very little is coming out. He's as uptight as a rolled umbrella. In terms of technique, yes, it is an extraordinary poem in which you have a constant use of bathos, of anticlimax. You have the overwhelming question, which is then refused. Do not ask what it is. Let us go and make our visit. Then you have the biblical pastiche of Ecclesiastes, the meditation on time. There will be time, there will be time. To prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create. But by the end of that, it's time for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea, and the whole thing dribbles away. By the end of the poem, this use of bathos and anticlimax is actually deepened, so it gets a tragic note. It's not simply ironic.
No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool. Deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times, indeed, almost ridiculous, at times, almost the fool. I grow old, I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing, each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown.
Prufrock wasn't actually published until 1915, by which time Eliot had left America and settled in England. He came initially to take up a post at Oxford, but quickly discovered in the artistic life of London a more congenial climate for his writing.
For the first time in his life, he found himself with people of his own age who took poetry seriously.
And he also converted to Anglo-Catholicism. And you'd see Eliot begin to substitute for the pagan secular literary terms classicism and romanticism, the Christian and the theological terms of orthodoxy in heresy. So moving into the 1930s, he was no longer speaking so much as a literary critic, but he ascended the platform in the role of the moralist. Felt free to say, I believe that a right tradition for us must be a Christian tradition. He insisted for the first time on a right tradition for a very specific American us. He was beginning to connect social criteria and Christianity. The ideology of unselective and universal sympathy was matched to a constituency that recalled the small social enclaves created by the medieval feudal system. Within that system, Christianity worked so well precisely because there was an ideology of hierarchical control and social subordination. So T.S. Eliot has a very aristocratic and medieval and Christian traditionalist view on life. So tradition, or those habitual actions, habits, and customs, from the most significant religious rites to our conventional way of greeting a stranger, which represent the blood kinship of the same people living in the same place. And that was only possible with a homogeneous people.
Took culture seriously and were able to discuss it at great length on many occasions. So that was one element of it. The other element was that he was an authoritarian by temper, and being an aristocratic American, disdained the American tradition of politics and society. He found in Europe what he'd not been able to find in America, which was a strong, almost medieval cultural tradition, an authoritarian cultural tradition to which he wanted to ascribe himself. It's a decision he never really regretted either, because he never actually went home to live in America again.
So T.S. Eliot came a long way from his cultural thinking, since asserting in 1919 that tradition cannot be inherited, and if you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. This implied that tradition could be acquired intellectually by an exertion of intelligence and imagination, not by social osmosis, but by living continuously in one place. Now is moving towards, we need one people, one homogeneous community. Now, Jewish admirers of his poetry preferred to ignore T.S. Eliot's nasty lines, but as George Steiner pointed out, Eliot's uglier touches tended to occur at the heart of very good poetry. They occur most notably in the poems of 1920, Gerontion, Burbank with the Baedeker, Bleistein with a cigar, and Sweeney among the nightingales. His early Jewish admirers wanted to remain unenlightened about the direction of Eliot's cultural theories, or if they suspected them, they found it difficult to criticize Eliot. After all, he was central to their culture, and they were not, so they thought. It would have required a courage bordering on foolishness for Jews to point out that there was too much Christianity in T.S. Eliot's prose. Now, some Jews dared to say that, but only in private conversations. Thought of T.S. Eliot, Santayana mused, and Santayana was an ex-Catholic atheist, not Jewish. Thought of T.S. Eliot is subterranean without being profound. His peep and run intuition appears even in his Anglo-Catholicism. He likes this in Christianity, and he dislikes that. Feels a general dismay at the natural course of the world. He dreads and does not understand the radical forces at work in the world and in the church. He is beautifully sensitive to the cross lights that traverse the middle distance. He hopes to set up barriers of custom and barriers of taste, keep mankind from touching bottom or from quite seeing the light. And Santiana, published in 1931, aristocratic people, meaning people like T.S. Eliot, who are sure of their own taste and manners, are indifferent, except for a general curiosity to the disputes of critics and pedants, perhaps to the maxims of preachers such things are imposing, only to those who are inwardly wondering what they ought to do and how they ought to feel. Truly enlightened mind is all the simpler for being enlightened, and thinks, not without a modest sort of irony, that art and life exist to be enjoyed and not to be estimated. Right, I want to go back to that discussion there with Doov and just pop in more with my own thoughts. So let me play this again.
Several issues, but it was always extremely friendly. And as I stated earlier, he was just a giant teddy bear. Let us move on to the next subject. As reiterated previously, a project like this would not be balanced without the perspective of minorities. Thus, aside from David, I also accrued the wisdom of a Hasidic Jew. He goes by the online moniker of Doov with 4 O's and runs a small interfaith program in the greater Detroit metropolitan area. Additionally, Doov has more than overtly done the rounds, so to speak, on many different alternative media sites, podcasts, and...
Okay, so both Doov and I are not normal representatives of Orthodox Judaism.
General YouTube streams buttressing the position of the Jewish people at large, including against those of the unabashed alt-right, racist, anti-Semitic stance. Doov in particular is a proud Jew and encourages and advocates for multiculturalism in the United States, yet, nevertheless, ostensibly opposes it for Israel.
Yeah, and that's not true. Doov does not oppose multiculturalism for Israel.
Strangely enough. Here was a partition of our discussion.
I kind of enjoyed defending the Jews. I grew up in...
Doov enjoys debate, so not just defending the Jews, but just like some people like to shoot baskets, Doov likes to play chess, and he likes to engage in debate, and almost whenever he does it, he's always high as well. So he's high on marijuana, and that affects the way he expresses himself.
Urban multicultural places, so to say, demographic change had largely already occurred.
And that reminds me, so I have friends in Australia who live in homogeneous communities, and they love multiculturalism. I yearn for homogeneous community, and yet I choose to live in Los Angeles.
When I was a child, is that whites were a minority already.
Oh, that's not a bad thing. I feel like this is where a lot of people get in trouble. It's like the white nationalists want to be able to defend their race preservation, which I don't actually find offensive. I'm like, well, if the Japanese want to stay Japanese and have a homogenous nation, and the Jews can do it in Israel, then yeah, the white people should be able to do it too.
Okay, so Jews don't exactly have a homogeneous nation in Israel. So about a quarter to a third of the population of Israel is not Jewish. So that's a very weird ethno-state when more than 25% of your population actively hates you and wants you dead, right? That's not really an ethno-state.
I don't really care. I think that's fine. So, but what I don't like about the dynamic there is that, it's okay for Jews to enjoy that, and it's okay for me as a Christian to want to, be a bit of an apologist for my own ideology, not necessarily for my own people. I don't really collectivize myself in that manner. What are your feelings towards what I'm saying? Do you think if Israel or the Jewish nation or the Jewish ethnic group, whatever the wording is you want to use, if it's okay for them to be apologists and to enjoy?
Okay, so there's no Jewish view on collectivism, on multiculturalism. So different views have different opinions on multiculturalism, on immigration policy. So it's not like Jews collectively have one policy that they want for the Jewish state and the very opposite that they want for the Gentile lands where they live. So that's where she's getting mixed up. So you have Jews in Israel who want multiculturalism and don't want to send back illegal immigrants. And you have Jews in America who want multiculturalism, don't want to send away illegal immigrants. And then you have Jews on the right in both places who support expelling illegal immigrants and retaining one dominant culture.
Doing what you do, then every other group should be able to do that too, right?
I mean, that would sound.
Well, most groups are primarily concerned with their own group, so it's simply not the concern of for Japanese what any other people do. So even if Jews were just like she said, where they're only interested in their own welfare, that's not true, but you would expect groups to primarily care about their own welfare. That would only make sense. So I don't think the Japanese are at fault because they don't spend much time thinking about the welfare of other nations. I don't think the Russians are at fault because they don't spend much time or concern about the welfare of non-Russians. So the way human being is built is that we primarily care about our own, and virtually nobody cares about outgroups. And she is buying into this widespread white nationalist myth that Jews support multiculturalism for thee, but homogeneity for me. And that's simply a lie. There are some Jews, only a very tiny percentage of Jews, who support such a dichotomy. Most Jews who support multiculturalism support it for the Jewish state and for other states. Most Jews who oppose multiculturalism have the same attitude for Gentile states as well as the Jewish state.
Sound logical, and reasonable. In practice, in politics, things might play out differently, and certainly in strategy, maybe group conflict or competitive strategy, your fairness doesn't necessarily play out that yes, it could be that Jews would promote open immigration and multiculturalism.
Okay, so she's talking about publicly stated strategy, and Doov here is talking about Machiavellian tactics, and Doov is alluding to groups will often publicly state that they're for something while their own behavior may contradict that when it is in their self-interest. But I would want to address, and the name's Dia Beltran, I would want to address her straight on with the point that there's no monolithic Jewish approach to multiculturalism and immigration.
In America, and oppose it in Israel, and say somewhat, well, isn't that hypocritical? Possibly, but there is a logic to it because as a minority in a foreign society, usually promoting things like multiculturalism and immigration benefit.
Okay, so minorities aren't generally politically active, all right? Only a tiny number are. Now, it would make sense, you would think, for minorities to side with the coalition of the fringe against the core until it stops making sense, right? If you start finding yourself so loathing, hating the other members of your coalition of the fringes, then it can suddenly switch where it makes much more sense to side with the majority culture. As opposed, so for many Jews, they become disgusted with, say, the gay agenda, the transsexual agenda, the Muslim agenda, the radical feminist agenda, and the radical left agenda. And so for some Jews, because of their disgust at the agendas of other members of the coalition of the fringes, they've moved on to support the American majority party of white Christians, and that's the Republican Party.
Minority groups, and in a majority country like Israel, usually promoting things like multiculturalism and immigration tend to not benefit the majority group. So whether it's hypocritical or not doesn't underlie the basic logic that it makes sense that people would think and behave like that.
Yeah, so Doov here is essentially saying, yeah, the critique of Jews wanting multiculturalism for thee, but homogeneity for me, that may make logical sense, but it makes simultaneously logical sense for Jews to pursue these dual strategies. And I wish you just would have pointed out that that this white nationalist trope is simply false. That the Jews who support multiculturalism in America are the same type of Jews supported in Israel.
I'm not really sure what you're saying. Are you saying you're saying it is logical, but then there's a lot of other words. So are you saying that are you admitting that Jews help multiculturalism in?
Okay, so she seems to be expecting Doov to be a spokesman for Jews, that he's going to make the argument for why what Jews do is awesome. And Doov is not talking as a publicist for Jews. Doov is talking as someone who's high and who is musing on the reality of human nature, including Jewish human nature, which is to often say one thing and do another. So I think Dia expects Doov to be a spokesman, and Doov doesn't so much want to be a spokesman. He just wants to share the reality of the world as he sees it.
In America? Is that what you just said? Sorry, because it did break up a bit. I mean, you're saying you're advocating for immigration, which I didn't realize you meant literally. Why does it concern you and the certain Jews that do that? What does it? Why not focus on Israel? Why not focus on the country?
Okay, so she doesn't know anything about Doov, but Doov pays very little attention to Israeli politics. He's not an Israeli political activist. He doesn't put much energy or time into Israeli politics. He lives in America. Doov does not support the current Jewish state of Israel, the secular state of Israel. He's not a Zionist. So she's under the misapprehension that he's a Zionist, that he's very involved with Israel. He's not. Doov chooses to live in the United States of America, and he is not overall very political, but he does participate in some various multicultural activities because he finds them intellectually stimulating. He finds them morally right. It'd be very difficult for a man in Detroit without financial resources to make a political difference in Israel, even if he wanted to.
Country that where your spiritual homeland is, where your heart is, like, want to focus on that and leave America to America.
Okay, so if Israel was where his heart was, he would live there. But to the best of my knowledge, Doov does not believe that a secular state of Israel, such as Israel is now, is legitimate. He's not a Zionist. He does not support a secular state. Okay, I think I'm running out of steam. Let's get a little bit more on this documentary on T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
Avant-garde life in London during the First World War was dominated by two great energies, Wyndham Lewis and another expatriate American, Ezra Pound. Pound in particular was to play a huge part in launching Eliot's career. Indeed, it was he who organised the first publication of Proofrock. Pound had joined Wyndham Lewis in founding a movement they called Vorticism, dedicated to reforming and modernising English cultural life. Inspired by Cubism and Futurism on the continent, Vorticism was determinedly behind all things modern and experimental. It was spirited and flamboyant, and the Vorticist magazine was, appropriately, called Blast.
Well, as the name Blast indicates, they were really trying to blast away the remnants of Victorianism and English Romanticism, what we'll call the Georgian poets, and they were trying to introduce modernism. What they were trying to do, as a matter of fact, was to create a modern tradition which connected with a past. They were against the sort of idea of tradition as simply carrying on with what your predecessors had done. It was a revolt against your immediate predecessors and a deliberate pushing yourself back into a much more remote past, but a relevant past.
What they're trying to do, people like Pound and Eliot, is really to introduce that kind of revolution into the history of poetry, as it already had occurred in music and painting, and all the antecedents of it existed in France, around about the great dates, 1870, 1880, and so on. What they were trying to do, trying to drag English into the mainstream again, not just the mainstream of modern poetry, but the mainstream of modern art.
The antics of the Vorticists were one of the few colourful aspects of life in wartime London. As the war dragged on, and the enormity of what was happening in the trenches began to sink in at home, the capital took on a blighted mood. And the bleak reality of the modern city found its way memorably into Eliot's verse, when in 1916 he began the poem that was eventually to be published as The Wasteland.
Unreal city, under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge. So many I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet. Flowed up the hill and down King William Street, to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9. There I saw one I knew.
I saw one I knew, and stopped him crying, "Stetson! You who were with me in the ships at Miley, that corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year? Or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed?
Okay, a question in D-Live. Luke, please correct me. Once a Jew, always a Jew? Yes, there is a teaching in Judaism that if you're born Jewish, you're always a Jew. On a practical matter, however, right, there are 4,000 years of Jewish tradition. There are many different opinions. It's not like there's a pope in Judaism who decides these matters. On a practical matter, if you're a Jew and you convert to Christianity, then on a practical matter, you are shunned by the Jewish community. So yeah, there's a theoretical perspective that once a Jew, always a Jew, and certainly many non-Jews view it that way as well. On a practical, empirical matter, once you convert to another religion from Judaism, such as Christianity or Islam, on a practical matter, you are considered no longer a member of the Jewish community. Now, theoretically, there are opinions, yeah, spiritually you're still a Jew. Practically, you're no longer a Jew.
Oh, keep the dog far hence that's friend to men, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. You, hypocrite lecteur, mon semblable, mon frère.
In relation to a poem like Prufrock, what you have here in Prufrock is a poem which looks backward and also looks forward. I mean, it's modernist, but it's also traditional. It's in the tradition of the dramatic monologue. By the time you get to the Wasteland, you've got something completely different. And if you wanted an analogy, supposing you look towards Picasso, you'd have the Rose period, then the Blue period, both of them different, but also recognizable. And then suddenly, analytical cubism. Here comes the Wasteland. And, boy, is it all happening. You can't quite follow it, but it seems very, very modern indeed. And there's a lot of modern life in it.
In England, it was what Cyril Connolly called the Great Knockout Up to Date. It was a poem which had jazz rhythms, it had urban symbolism, it had anthropological myth, it had the whole gamut of what were then fashionable concerns poured into this slender vessel.